If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more gripping true crime stories that uncover the mysteries communities thought were long buried. Tennessee, 2006. An otherwise sleepy, rolling town of just over 12,000 people, nestled between misty hills and thick forests, would soon find itself shaken to its core. The sun had just begun to climb over the horizon, casting long shadows over the red brick houses and narrow streets, when a sense of unease settled in like a chill fog. The air carried the scent of damp earth and faint smoke from someone's early morning breakfast fire. But beneath that ordinary morning rhythm, something sinister was about to disrupt the town forever. The town of Cedar Grove was a place where everyone knew each other. Children rode their bicycles on cracked sidewalks, waving at neighbors watering their lawns. Shops opened early, the faint jingle of cash registers punctuating the quiet hum of conversation. But on that morning, whispers had begun to circulate. Something had gone terribly wrong, and no one could quite put their finger on what it was. Jennifer Harper, 29, had been a fixture in Cedar Grove for all her life. Her hair was the color of autumn chestnuts, usually pulled into a loose ponytail, and her hazel eyes carried a warmth that made everyone she met feel seen. She worked at the local library, a small but charming brick building lined with oaks, where she spent hours recommending books to teenagers and seniors alike. She loved quiet moments, early morning walks, and her golden retriever, Max, who followed her everywhere. Jennifer was meticulous, kind, and unassuming, a person who left an imprint on everyone she touched, though she never sought attention for it. The night before her disappearance had been normal. She had returned from a dinner with a friend, a casual gathering at a diner near the highway. Her friend remembered her laughing over a shared memory, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, completely at ease. Jennifer had driven home in her old blue sedan, windows down, music playing softly. The air was cool, carrying a faint scent of pine and wet asphalt from a brief evening drizzle. When she arrived home, she had called her brother, Mark, to check in, a ritual they maintained since childhood. She was cheerful, mentioning a project she was working on at the library and a new recipe she wanted to try. There was no hint of fear, no premonition of danger. But when Jennifer didn't show up at the library the next morning, concern began to ripple through the community. Her co-workers noted her absence first, puzzled because she never missed work without calling. Then came the calls to her house. No answer. Max, usually bounding to greet anyone at the door, was found scratching at the back porch, whimpering, alone. The neighbors noticed her car still parked in the driveway, untouched, with the engine cold and the radio silent. Something had disrupted the carefully ordered life of Jennifer Harper, and by midday, the town felt a tremor of fear. Detective Laura Benson was the first to arrive at the Harper residence. Benson, a 36-year-old investigator with a reputation for methodical precision, had grown up in a region and knew the weight of small-town gossip and rumor. She noted the little details. The mail stacked neatly on the table, Jennifer's keys still in the bowl by the door, her backpack left behind with notebooks neatly arranged. Nothing seemed out of place, and yet Jennifer was gone. The scene offered no forced entry, no sign of struggle, only the eerie quiet of absence. The kind that whispers, something is very wrong. Neighbors were questioned. A few claimed to have seen Jennifer walking her dog that morning, Max trailing behind, ears perked and leash slack. Others reported hearing the distant roar of a car engine on the winding streets. Too early for most commuters, but none could provide a clear description. As the hours ticked by, the unease transformed into fear. Cedar Grove, a town that thrived on familiarity, was suddenly permeated with suspicion. Who would want to harm Jennifer Harper? Or had she left on her own? The possibilities were as endless as they were terrifying. By evening, the town's modest community center was transformed into an impromptu command hub. Local law enforcement coordinated with state investigators, sharing the scant details they had and piecing together the last known movements of Jennifer. Families huddled in the pews of the adjoining church hall, some praying silently, others pacing, exchanging worried glances. The sense of urgency was almost tangible in the air, thick with the mingling smells of freshly brewed coffee, anxious perfume, and a faint tang of cleaning supplies from hurriedly tidied rooms. Detective Benson stood at the front, her notebook open, recording every fragment of witness testimony. She listened as neighbors recounted mundane details, then replayed them with attention that suggested something deeper, something they hadn't noticed at first. The librarian's assistant mentioned a strange phone call the night before, a man asking for Jennifer, his voice low and hurried, a question that never got answered. At the time, she hadn't thought much of it. Now, it gnawed at the edges of every theory. As darkness settled over Cedar Grove, streetlights flickered into life along Main Street. The town felt smaller, more vulnerable. The breeze carried the rustle of leaves that sounded almost like whispers. Jennifer's apartment was spotless, untouched, but the presence of her absence filled every corner. The golden retriever whined again, circling the door. Someone muttered that they had seen a figure in the woods at the edge of the neighborhood, moving too quickly to be identified. Eyes turned, fear tightening like a noose. Cedar Grove was a town that had never had to confront a true nightmare, and now it seemed that nightmare had arrived uninvited. That night, Detective Benson stood outside the Harper home, the chill of November creeping into her coat, and stared at the darkened windows. Somewhere inside, somewhere beyond the rolling hills and thick forests, Jennifer Harper was out there. Safe? Injured? Or worse? The questions lingered unanswered, and as the wind whispered through the trees, Benson felt a familiar, gnawing sensation. A case was beginning, but the solution, like the darkness, remained out of reach. And just as the town settled in for what everyone feared might be a long, restless night, a faint sound broke the silence. A phone ringing somewhere in the darkness, the first of many threads that would pull Cedar Grove into a story none of them could forget. But who would pick up the call? And what secrets would it reveal? Cliffhanger. A single mysterious call had been made late that night, a call that might change everything. But what was said and to whom would remain a question that haunted everyone until the first breakthrough of the investigation began to emerge. The morning after Jennifer Harper vanished, Cedar Grove was awake, but it was as if the town itself held its breath. The autumn sun struggled through a thick gray sky, the damp chill clinging to the sidewalks and alleys. Leaves skittered across empty streets, driven by a sharp, restless wind that seemed to echo the unease in the hearts of everyone who lived here. The Harpers' home, still shadowed by the previous night's events, drew glances from neighbors who whispered behind curtains, their eyes flicking nervously toward the silent driveway and the stillness inside. Mark Harper, Jennifer's younger brother by 3 years, was the first family member to feel the true weight of panic. He had woken before dawn, driven by instinct more than reason, and found her phone on the kitchen counter, untouched, along with a small collection of books she'd been reading. At first, he assumed she had simply slept in or gone for a quiet walk. But the minutes passed, the hours stretched, and reality crept in like cold water into a sinking boat. She wasn't home. She hadn't answered her phone. Max, normally boisterous and loyal, refused to eat, whimpering at the door. The house was unervingly quiet. Mark's mind raced, a torrent of worst-case scenarios spilling over each other. "Mom? Dad?" he called out, though he knew they were hundreds of miles away, their work schedules keeping them in Nashville. No answer. He tried Jennifer's best friend, Angela, hoping for some reassurance. But Angela's voice trembled when she picked up. "Mark, she never made it to the library today. I called her house. No one's there. I don't know." By mid-morning, the Cedar Grove Police Department had mobilized, though in a town this size, mobilization was measured and methodical. Officers arrived at the Harper residence, noting every detail with a clinical detachment that only experience, or perhaps routine, could bring. They found the same scene Detective Benson had arrived at the night before. The apartment in order, no signs of struggle, no indication of forced entry. Jennifer's life had been interrupted so abruptly, it left an invisible mark on the air itself. Residents began to trickle into the streets, drawn by the unusual activity at the Harper home. Conversations, first tentative, grew louder and more urgent. "Did you hear about Jennifer?" one neighbor whispered. Another shook their head, eyes wide. Children peeked from behind curtains, sensing the tension that hung over the town like a dense fog. The local diner, usually filled with a comforting hum of coffee and morning chatter, was unusually silent. The regulars clustered near the windows, glancing outside as if the air itself carried a warning. Detective Benson took charge of the early-stage investigation, assembling officers in the dimly lit living room, with a scent of brewed coffee mixed with a faintly metallic tang of anxiety. She methodically went over the last confirmed sightings, Jennifer leaving the diner, her call to Mark, her drive home. Nothing seemed amiss. And yet, nothing was adding up. The most troubling part was that Jennifer had no known enemies, no threats, no indications of leaving town voluntarily. She was meticulous in her routines, careful in her habits, and loved by those who knew her. By midday, local media began to descend on Cedar Grove, cameras capturing the anxious faces of neighbors and the tense posture of police officers. The story spread quickly. One missing woman in a small town, her life suddenly upended. Jennifer Harper missing. Community on edge. One reporter's banner read. Questions swirled like a storm. Where had she gone? Could this have been an accident, a random crime, or something more calculated? The uncertainty left a heavy, suffocating tension over the town. As the hours dragged into the afternoon, search parties formed. Volunteers combed the surrounding woods, the overgrown trails twisting like dark ribbons beneath skeletal trees. Their boots pressed into damp leaves and soil, sending up faint clouds of earthy scent, while the distant hum of traffic on Highway 41 served as a reminder that danger could come from anywhere. Mark Harper walked alongside them, calling Jennifer's name, voice hoarse, echoing off the hills and fading into the shadows. He held Max's leash tightly, the dog straining forward with instinctual anxiety. The wind carried their voices, but there was no reply. Rumors began to circulate, the kind that spread quickly in towns this size. Some claimed to have seen a strange car parked near the library the night before, a dark sedan that had vanished before anyone could take note of the license plate. Others whispered about a man who had been asking odd questions around town, lingering in ways that made people uneasy but never overtly threatening. Detective Benson knew that early leads were fragile. Every whisper, every nervous observation could be a clue or a trap leading down a dead end. By late afternoon, the investigation had intensified. Officers knocked on doors, asking the same questions over and over, jotting down details that seemed small but might later become critical. The sheriff convened a press briefing in the town hall, the fluorescent lights harsh and unflattering. Cameras clicked and rolled as he spoke, assuring the community that every possible avenue was being pursued. But his words, meant to comfort, only underscored the gravity of the situation. A missing person case was always unpredictable, and the longer Jennifer remained unfound, the more the fear grew. That evening, a chilling development occurred. A neighbor, walking his dog along the tree line near the edge of town, spotted something half hidden in the brush. At first, he thought it was a discarded jacket, but as he approached, he realized it was Jennifer's backpack, lying open and empty, straps tangled in branches, soil and leaves clinging to the fabric. The discovery sent a ripple of panic through the police force. Forensic technicians photographed the scene, careful to preserve what little evidence remained. The backpack contained a notebook, pages filled with library schedules, grocery lists, and personal reflections, but nothing that suggested a destination or clue to her disappearance. The town's fear had shifted from hope to dread. Cedar Grove's residents began to lock doors they usually left open, glancing at strangers with suspicion. Children no longer rode bikes freely. Adults lingered near porches and windows, whispering theories that ranged from the mundane to the macabre. The fabric of normal life had been pulled apart, leaving behind tension, mistrust, and an aching uncertainty. As night fell, Detective Benson sat alone in her office, reviewing witness statements and phone records. One detail gnawed at her, a call made to Jennifer's phone late the previous night. The mysterious number traced only to a disposable prepaid phone, impossible to link. No one in town admitted to having seen it, and no one knew who could have made it. The pieces were scattered, disconnected, but something told her that they were on the cusp of a breakthrough, though the nature of that breakthrough was still shrouded in shadows. And just as the first patrol cars were leaving the downtown area, lights reflecting on wet pavement, a second mysterious phone call was logged. This one came from a number linked to a town outside Cedar Grove, a place Jennifer had no reason to visit. The caller's voice was distorted, hurried, almost panicked. They said nothing but left a single, cryptic word on voicemail. Watch. Cliffhanger. That single word, watch, would haunt the investigators and the Harper family for weeks. Who had called? And what were they warning or threatening the town about? The Harper family was shaken to their core. Mark Harper, who had spent every moment since Jennifer's disappearance combing the town, now faced a heavier task of consoling their mother, Eleanor, who had arrived from Nashville late that afternoon. Eleanor was a small, fragile woman, her usually composed demeanor shattered by worry and fear. Her hands trembled as she clutched the scarf Jennifer had worn the night before she vanished. "She wouldn't leave without telling us," Eleanor whispered repeatedly, her voice raw, echoing to the quiet living room. Each repetition was a desperate attempt to ground herself in hope, yet with every minute that passed, hope felt thinner, more like smoke slipping through fingers. The news traveled quickly through Cedar Grove. In a town where everyone knew one another, the disappearance became more than a family tragedy. It was a communal wound. Churches opened their doors for prayer vigils, and the local high school gymnasium hosted a gathering for volunteers. People brought blankets, flashlights, and thermoses of coffee, but beneath the practical assistance was a shared, unspoken fear. No one could remember a time when the familiar streets of their town had felt so alien, so charged with dread. Neighbors and friends converged at the Harper residence, offering what little comfort they could. Angela, Jennifer's best friend, stayed close to Mark, her face pale, lips pressed together as if holding back tears that refused to form. "She's smart," Angela said quietly, almost to herself. "She always knows how to get out of tricky situations. She'll come back, she has to." Her voice wavered despite her words. Beneath the veneer of optimism was a gnawing worry that Cedar Grove had never experienced before. Parents called their children in early, and the playgrounds remained empty. The local diner, once the hub of morning chatter, became a gathering point for updates and speculation. Each person brought a piece of the puzzle, yet the picture remained frustratingly incomplete. Some recalled seeing a suspicious figure near Jennifer's route home the night before, a man in a dark hoodie lingering near the library's back entrance. Others mentioned an unfamiliar car parked too long on a side street, vanishing just before anyone could note the license plate. The reports were inconsistent, fragments of memory distorted by fear, but each fragment demanded attention. Detective Benson understood the weight of community pressure. Cedar Grove's population was tight-knit, and every whispered theory reached her ears in some form or another. Volunteers were eager to help, but enthusiasm sometimes led interference with official procedures. Officers had to carefully coordinate search parties, instructing volunteers where to look and what to avoid. The woods surrounding the town, dense with oaks and maples, were as treacherous as they were familiar, and the early autumn rains had turned the forest floor into a patchwork of slippery mud and fallen leaves. Every footprint, every broken branch became a potential clue or a false lead. The family's response was a delicate balancing act between hope and fear. Mark spent hours on the phone, contacting friends, local media, and anyone who might have seen Jennifer. Eleanor, in contrast, oscillated between tearful despair and frantic energy, combing through drawers, checking her daughter's email, and scouring every corner of the house for a missed note or message. "Why isn't she answering?" Eleanor would cry, pressing the phone to her ear, willing Jennifer's voice to return her call. Mark would try to soothe her, his own heart racing. "Mom, she's out there somewhere. We'll find her," he whispered. But Evie felt the creeping uncertainty that had begun to settle in the pit of his stomach. The community also felt the loss in profound ways. Local shop owners posted flyers in windows, updating timelines, sharing photos, urging anyone with information come forward. Parents spoke in hushed tones in grocery store aisles, warning each other to keep children close. The town's mayor issued a statement calling for calm, but also emphasizing vigilance. Cedar Grove had always been considered safe, a town defined by trust and familiarity, but now that sense of security was fractured. Every shadow seemed elongated. Every stranger a potential threat, every unexplained noise a possible clue. Yet amidst the tension, moments of humanity emerged. Volunteers handed out water and blankets to search teams. High school students offered to help by canvassing neighborhoods, posting flyers, and scanning social media for any leads. Local churches organized prayer chains, the rhythmic murmur of hope blending with the anxious hum of community whispers. Detective Benson noted these acts of solidarity, understanding that they were as much a balm for the town's fear as they were practical assistance. The human need to act, to feel in control when control seemed impossible, drove the town forward in small, meaningful ways. However, the undercurrent of fear was relentless. A parent reported that someone had seen a dark figure near the woods bordering Highway 41 late at night, moving too quickly to identify. Another claimed that Jennifer's phone briefly pinged near the highway, but the signal was too weak to provide exact coordinates. As these reports surfaced, rumors spread, stories of strangers, of secret rendezvous, of a conspiracy that no one could verify. Cedar Grove was beginning to fracture along the lines of anxiety and speculation. Even within the Harper family, tensions rose. Mark and Eleanor argued, not out of anger, but out of desperation. Mark wanted to push forward, to organize searches and follow leads. Eleanor, worn down by exhaustion and grief, feared that they were moving too fast, missing small, critical details in their rush. "We're overlooking something," Mark shouted one night, pacing the kitchen. Eleanor shook her head, hands on her hips, voice trembling. "We can't force her back. We have to trust the process." Each argument ended in silence, both aware that the stakes were too high, the outcome uncertain, the weight of inaction as unbearable as the anxiety of doing something wrong. As night fell, Cedar Grove remained awake with tension. Streetlights flickered against the mist, casting long, wavering shadows over the quiet streets. In one of the empty playgrounds, a small group of neighbors huddled together, whispering theories, scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. Somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of a dog barking echoed, sharp and anxious, carrying through the damp air. Then, late that night, a strange occurrence unsettled the search parties. A series of footprints appeared along a muddy trail near the edge of the woods. Prints that seemed too large to belong to Jennifer, but small enough to suggest human movement. The pattern was erratic, as if whoever made them was nervous or hurried, weaving in and out among trees, sometimes pausing as though listening. Detective Benson crouched down to examine them, flashlight in hand, the beam catching glints of moisture on the disturbed soil. "These weren't here a few hours ago," she muttered to herself, voice low. The implications were immediate and unnerving. Someone had been in the woods recently, possibly connected to Jennifer's disappearance. Cliffhanger. The discovery of the mysterious footprints suggested that Jennifer's disappearance was not random, and someone had been close enough to leave their mark. But who had been there, and what had they done? As dawn approached, Detective Benson knew that these prints might be the first tangible lead, but they could also lead straight into danger. By dawn, Cedar Grove was restless again. The town streets, slick with overnight rain, reflected the pale light of early morning, and the scent of wet asphalt mixed with pine and damp earth. Detective Benson arrived at the Harper home before sunrise, determined to review every lead collected so far. She spread photographs of footprints, maps of surrounding woods, and witness statements across the dining room table. Coffee steamed in a nearby mug, but she barely touched it. Her mind was consumed by possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. The first priority was to follow the footprints discovered the previous night. Officers combed the muddy trails with meticulous care, noting impressions, spacing, and direction. It quickly became clear that the tracks led deeper into the forest than anyone had initially expected. The undergrowth was thick, branches clawing at clothing and skin, and the ground gave way to hidden roots that threatened missteps. The searchers' flashlights flickered in the morning gloom, and each snapping twig or distant bird call heightened their awareness. Something or someone had been here, and the uncertainty made the forest feel alive, aware, and threatening. Within hours, Detective Benson began interviewing more residents. She asked detailed questions about strange vehicles, unfamiliar people, and unusual behavior in the days leading up to Jennifer's disappearance. Many offered similar stories. A dark sedan parked outside the library late at night, a man who had loitered near the grocery store asking odd questions, a woman seen near Jennifer's apartment at unusual hours. All of these accounts, though fragmented and sometimes contradictory, painted a picture of someone watching Jennifer, someone who may have followed her routine closely. But every lead seemed to crumble under scrutiny. The dark sedan turned out to belong to a traveling salesman who had unknowingly parked near the library while making deliveries. The loitering man had a legitimate reason for being in town. He was an out-of-town contractor unfamiliar to residents. Even the woman near the apartment was traced to a local neighbor delivering cookies to friends. Each potential suspect dissolved into a dead end, and with every misstep, frustration grew, not just for law enforcement, but for the Harper family and the Cedar Grove community. Meanwhile, Detective Benson turned her attention to Jennifer's digital footprint. She combed through her emails, phone records, and social media activity, hoping for a clue that could illuminate the last hours of her life. The calls from unknown numbers, the voicemails left with cryptic messages like, "Watch," were traced as far as possible but stopped abruptly. Untraceable prepaid phones, burner numbers, dead ends. One email contained a suspicious link from an unknown sender, but it led nowhere. The digital trail, like much of the physical evidence, seemed to vanish the moment it appeared promising. The Harper family's patience, already strained, began to fray under the weight of uncertainty. Mark Harper spent long hours walking the streets, canvassing neighborhoods, and following up on every tip. He called Jennifer's friends repeatedly, trying to reconstruct her last known movements. Yet, with each conversation, he encountered gaps. Times she was unaccounted for, meetings she might have attended but never mentioned, fleeting encounters with strangers she never detailed. The family's hope flickered like a candle in a strong wind, threatened by every unanswered question. Then came the first major false lead. A man in a nearby town was arrested for a string of petty crimes and noted to have been traveling through Cedar Grove the week before Jennifer vanished. Witnesses claimed he fit the vague description of someone seen near her apartment. The town's fear and anticipation surged. Finally, they thought, a breakthrough. Detective Benson and her team drove hours to the suspect location, but the man had a solid alibi. Surveillance footage confirmed he had been elsewhere during Jennifer's disappearance. The momentary surge of hope crashed into bitter disappointment, leaving the community's anxiety deeper than before. Rumors continued to swirl, fueled by the uncertainty. Some speculated that Jennifer had been kidnapped by someone she knew, while others whispered about a stranger, a predator passing through the town. A few even suggested she had run away voluntarily, though those who knew her best, friends, family, and colleagues, found that notion impossible. Jennifer's meticulous nature, her love for routine, and her strong ties to family and community made voluntary disappearance highly unlikely. Yet, with no evidence to the contrary, each possibility loomed large, threatening to cloud rational judgment. As days stretched into weeks, the investigative team faced mounting pressure. Cedar Grove streets were patrolled constantly. Missing person posters adorned every storefront, and volunteers combed the forested edges of town daily. Detective Benson coordinated with state law enforcement, forensic specialists, and even psychologists to profile potential suspects. Every call, every tip, every strange sighting was logged and cross-referenced, yet the case seemed to evade resolution at every turn. During this period, one particularly unsettling incident occurred. A note was discovered pinned to a tree near the trail where Jennifer's backpack had been found. It was typed with a single sentence, "Stop looking or you'll regret it." Detective Benson examined it carefully, gloves on, under the harsh beam of her flashlight. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, nothing linking it directly to a suspect. Yet the message carried an undeniable threat, chilling in its brevity. The community's anxiety spiked again. Parents kept children inside. Neighbors doubted strangers, and even familiar faces, who might hide secrets behind polite smiles. Then, months into the investigation, a new lead emerged. Someone who claimed to have seen Jennifer near the highway, close to a secluded rest area, on the night she disappeared. She had been alone, carrying her backpack, and a dark sedan had followed her for a stretch before disappearing around a bend. Detective Benson dispatched officers immediately, but when they arrived, the rest area was empty. Surveillance cameras had been offline that night due to maintenance. Again, the trail went cold. The false lead began to take a toll on everyone involved. Mark Harper spent nights pacing the floors of his home, replaying scenarios over and over. Eleanor Harper barely ate, subsisting on coffee and anxiety. Detective Benson, who prided herself on attention to detail, found herself staring at maps and statements late into the night, trying to piece together a puzzle that seemed intentionally unsolvable. Cedar Grove's community meetings grew tense. Fear, anger, and speculation collided, with some residents questioning the efficacy of law enforcement, while others offered theories bordering on paranoia. Yet even in the midst of dead ends, the investigation advanced in small, painstaking ways. DNA evidence from the backpack, although minimal, was collected and cataloged. Officers scoured regional databases for matches. Witnesses were re-interviewed, their initial observations scrutinized under new light. Each step felt incremental, frustratingly slow, but Detective Benson refused to let the trail go cold. She understood that in cases like this, patience and persistence were the only weapons against despair. One evening, after another long day of interviews, Benson returned to her office, exhausted but unable to rest. The town was quiet now, the streets slick and reflective under the moonlight. As she reviewed notes, her eyes caught a pattern in the timing of anonymous calls and sightings. They weren't random. Someone had been watching Jennifer, carefully, calculatingly, and there was a method to the chaos that had frustrated the investigation for months. But what did it mean? And could it finally lead them to her? Cliffhanger. Detective Benson began to see a pattern in the chaos, a thread that suggested Jennifer's disappearance was no accident. But as she prepared to follow it, she had no idea how dangerous the next discovery would be and how close it might bring the perpetrator to harming someone else. Months turned into years, and the disappearance of Jennifer Harper became one of Cedar Grove's most haunting mysteries. The initial frenzy had subsided, leaving behind a quiet, simmering unease that settled over the town like a shadow. Detectives revisited files and notes, but each lead that once held promise had long since dissolved. Yet for Detective Laura Benson, the case refused to leave her mind. She had developed a routine, arriving at her office before sunrise, poring over old photographs, witness statements, and forensic reports, searching for details that had been overlooked. The Harper family, now living under the weight of unresolved grief, clung to her persistence as a fragile thread of hope. Jennifer's apartment had long since been secured as evidence. Every corner photographed, every item cataloged. Forensic teams re-examined the small details, the placement of books on shelves, the fingerprints on doorknobs, the fibers on her backpack. DNA samples, though minimal, were stored carefully, cataloged, and cross-checked against databases that expanded year by year. Technological advances in DNA analysis provided fleeting hope. Benson often sat late into the night, staring at the reports, thinking about what could be uncovered if even the smallest overlooked sample could finally tell a story. The community's attention shifted to the periphery. Residents continued to leave flowers at the edge of the forest where Jennifer's backpack had been found. Candlelight vigils were held sporadically. Prayers murmured in hushed tones, and the occasional volunteer still scoured the woods, hoping for a trace that might have been missed. Though life went on in Cedar Grove, the shadow of her absence was ever present. Businesses closed a little earlier. Streets were walked more cautiously at night, and every stranger passing through town drew wary glances. Jennifer Harper had become both memory and cautionary tale, a reminder of vulnerability in a place once considered safe. As the years passed, false sightings emerged. Some claimed to see Jennifer in nearby towns. Others swore she had been spotted in a different state. Each tip, investigated meticulously, came in nothing. The trail remained cold, and the Harper family's hope dimmed with every dead end. Mark Harper, now visibly older and wearier, spent countless nights scanning the internet, posting updates, and following up on leads that had long since been abandoned. Eleanor Harper's health declined under the strain of persistent anxiety, her life overshadowed by her daughter's absence and the gnawing uncertainty of what had truly happened. Despite the stagnation, there were small sparks of progress. In one instance, forensic analysts discovered a faint DNA trace on Jennifer's backpack that had been overlooked in initial tests. It was not a match for anyone in local or state databases at the time, but with the expansion of national DNA records, it was carefully preserved, cataloged, and set aside for future comparison. Detective Benson treated this trace like a seed planted for future, knowing that technology was advancing faster than criminals could cover their tracks. The town itself, though outwardly resuming normal life, remained subtly changed. Streets once familiar became paths of suspicion. Neighborhood watch programs, previously dormant, were revived. Children were no longer allowed to play unsupervised, and parents spoke in hushed tones about strangers lingering too long. Cedar Grove had learned, painfully, that the world could intrude on safety, and the scars of Jennifer's disappearance had left the town perpetually vigilant. Detective Benson continued to push the boundaries of investigation, even as the case grew cold. She cross-referenced old witness statements with new technology, ran fingerprints and DNA against updated databases, and consulted with behavioral analysts to create detailed profiles of possible suspects. Every fragment of information was scrutinized, every inconsistency analyzed. Though the trail was faint, Benson refused to abandon it. She knew that cold cases could thaw, that a single overlooked clue, a new technological advance, or a sudden tip could reignite hope. For the Harper family, the cold case phase was a daily exercise in restraint and despair. Mark spent long hours writing journals, documenting memories of Jennifer, and compiling timelines of her last known actions. Eleanor, too, clung to hope, organizing community vigils, keeping her daughter's room exactly as it had been when she vanished, as though maintaining order might preserve the possibility of her return. Their home was a quiet shrine to absence, each corner a reminder of what had been lost and what remained unresolved. During this phase, Detective Benson often revisited the cryptic phone calls made the night Jennifer disappeared. Those short messages, particularly the single-word watch, had never been traced definitively. Advances in cell phone tracking and signal triangulation provided little new information. The burner phones had left only fragments, traces lost in the digital noise of time. Yet Benson remained convinced that they contained a key, a thread that, if pulled at the right time, might unravel the entire mystery. Then, nearly 5 years after Jennifer's disappearance, a small breakthrough occurred. The DNA sample from her backpack, preserved meticulously in the evidence vault, returned a partial match with a man previously convicted of minor offenses in a neighboring state. While it was not a definitive identification, it was enough to reopen lines of inquiry, to focus attention on someone previously dismissed, and to reignite both hope and fear in Cedar Grove. Detective Benson immediately scheduled interviews, cross-referencing travel records and criminal history, aware that the suspect may have crossed paths with Jennifer during her final hours. The Harper family received the news cautiously. The possibility that Jennifer's disappearance could finally be explained was both exhilarating and terrifying. Months of stagnation had created an almost unbearable tension, and now, the potential for resolution loomed closer than it had in half a decade. Mark and Eleanor clung to the slim promise that answers were at hand, even as they braced for the potential devastation that the truth might bring. Cliffhanger. The partial DNA match hinted at a breakthrough that could finally reveal Jennifer's fate. But with the suspect's identity shrouded in secrecy and time having blurred memories and trails, Detective Benson knew that uncovering the truth would be dangerous, and the next step could shake Cedar Grove to its very core. Nearly 6 years after Jennifer Harper disappeared, Cedar Grove's long nightmare was finally approaching a turning point. Detective Benson had spent countless nights combing through the partial DNA match, correlating it with criminal records, travelogues, and witness statements. The man identified was Richard Kane, a transit with a history of petty crimes and a disturbing pattern of stalking behavior in neighboring towns. Though he had never been linked to violent offenses before, the DNA evidence placed him in proximity to Jennifer in a way that demanded immediate attention. Benson convened a small, specialized task force, careful to maintain secrecy. News of the breakthrough had not yet reached the public, and the team worked swiftly to confirm Kane's whereabouts. Surveillance, phone tracking, and informant networks indicated that he had recently been spotted near a highway rest stop several towns over. Officers coordinated quietly, mindful of the dangers of confronting someone with a potential history of violence. Every step was calculated, every movement precise, because the stakes were painfully clear. Jennifer's case had gone cold for years, but Kane's presence now could be both a key and a threat. The arrest itself unfolded with tense precision. Officers cornered Kane in a rented apartment, the dull hum of traffic outside masking the quiet urgency of their approach. Detective Benson, flanked by 2 officers, knocked on the door and announced their presence. There was a long silence, punctuated by the faint rustle of movement within. Then the lock clicked, and Kane appeared, tall, wiry, and deceptively calm. "Detective Benson," he said, voice steady, almost casual. "I figured it was only a matter of time." Inside, Kane's apartment bore traces of transient living. A few personal items, scattered papers, and a small laptop. Nothing obvious linked him directly to Jennifer, but Detective Benson knew better. The DNA evidence, combined with witness reports, his presence near Cedar Grove at the time, and behavioral patterns, formed a compelling case. Kane was read his rights, placed in handcuffs, and led into a waiting squad car. The cool night air contrasted sharply with the adrenaline coursing through the officers, a mixture of triumph and anticipation. Back in Cedar Grove, news of the arrest spread quickly. The Harper family was informed immediately. Eleanor Harper collapsed into Mark's arms, tears streaming, a mixture of relief, fear, and pent-up grief overwhelming her. Mark's hand shook as he dialed Detective Benson, desperate for confirmation. When Benson assured him that Kane was in custody and that they would soon have answers about Jennifer, Mark felt a fragile hope surge through him, though he knew the path to closure was still uncertain. The arrest prompted a flurry of investigation and questioning. Kane initially remained silent, refusing to cooperate with officers, his calm demeanor unnerving everyone in the room. But forensic evidence, carefully collected from his apartment, personal items, and vehicle, began to paint a clearer picture. Fibers matching those found on Jennifer's backpack were located, and trace DNA evidence linked him further to her belongings. Investigators could finally see the outlines of horrifying reality that had been hidden for years. A breakthrough came when Kane's laptop revealed searches, notes, and correspondence that suggested he had been tracking Jennifer prior to her disappearance. Locations she frequented, routines she maintained, and observations he had made were documented meticulously, painting a chilling portrait of premeditation. Detective Benson, reviewing the files late into the night, felt a cold certainty. Kane had watched Jennifer, waited for the right moment, and acted in secrecy. For 6 long years, he had eluded capture, but now, his meticulous record-keeping had become his undoing. During subsequent interrogations, Kane finally admitted to following Jennifer on the night of her disappearance. He claimed he had intended only to observe, but when she noticed him and began to flee, panic had driven him to act, resulting in her abduction. The details were harrowing, difficult for even seasoned officers to process. Kane revealed that he had kept Jennifer hidden in a remote location for a short period before releasing her, though her fear and trauma had led her to avoid contact with anyone for months. The full truth of her experiences during those first terrifying hours was only beginning to emerge. As the news reached Cedar Grove, the town experienced a complicated mix of emotions. Relief? Yes, that came with behind bars. Fear? Yes, that someone so close had eluded them for so long. But above all, a fragile sense of closure began to emerge. For the Harper family, the arrest was a turning point, a moment when years of uncertainty, sleepless nights, and grief finally intersected with justice. Eleanor Harper clutched a faded photograph of Jennifer, whispering a prayer of thanks that the nightmare might at last be ending. Cliffhanger. While Kane's arrest brought relief, Detective Benson knew that the hardest part was still to come, uncovering the full truth of Jennifer's ordeal and ensuring that Cedar Grove could truly begin to heal. The question remained, what had Jennifer endured, and would the community ever feel safe again? The arrest of Richard Kane marked a turning point not just for the Harper family, but for the entire town of Cedar Grove. Though the past 6 years have been shrouded in fear and uncertainty, Kane's capture brought a long-awaited sense of relief. Detective Benson oversaw the final stages of the investigation, piecing together the timeline of events and ensuring that all evidence was properly documented for the impending trial. Cedar Grove, a town that lived under the shadow of Jennifer's disappearance, began to breathe a little easier, but the scars left by those years would not fade quickly. For Mark and Eleanor Harper, the relief was intertwined with exhaustion and residual grief. Jennifer, now in counseling and slowly rebuilding her life, reunited with her family under careful, protective circumstances. The first embrace after years apart was raw and tearful, a mixture of joy, sorrow, and a quiet acknowledgement of all that had been lost. "I never stopped looking for you," Mark whispered, his voice cracking, as he held his sister close. Eleanor, trembling with emotion, pressed her forehead to Jennifer's hair, feeling the tangible proof that her daughter had survived, that hope had endured. The town's response was layered and complex. Cedar Grove, which had become almost paralyzed by fear and suspicion, gradually began the process of healing. Streetlights seemed brighter, children played with renewed freedom, and neighbors greeted one another without the constant undercurrent of suspicion that had dominated the years of uncertainty. Yet the memory of Jennifer's disappearance lingered, a quiet reminder of how quickly normalcy could be fractured. Local authorities held community meetings, reinforcing the importance of vigilance, support, and trust, while also acknowledging the trauma that the town had collectively endured. Detective Benson, reflecting on the case, felt a mixture of satisfaction and solemnity. She had pursued a thread through years of dead ends, false leads, and technological limitations, driven by persistence and a refusal to let a victim fade into obscurity. In her quiet office, she often revisited the case files, not to obsess, but to remind herself of the fragility of life, the importance of diligence, and the resilience of those who refused to give up. The Harper family's reunion was the most tangible reward, yet she knew the emotional healing was only beginning. Jennifer herself faced the slow, painstaking work of recovery. She returned to familiar routines, retraced her steps cautiously, and rebuilt connections with friends and family. Therapy sessions became a sanctuary, offering tools to process trauma and regain a sense of control. Yet even in moments of laughter or simple domestic comfort, the echoes of those long years remained. Every street corner, every forested edge of Cedar Grove held a memory of fear and uncertainty. Slowly, however, she began to reclaim her life, her resilience a testament to the human capacity to endure even the darkest circumstances. The Harper family, while forever changed, found solace in community and the support of Cedar Grove's residents. Volunteers who had helped in the early days, neighbors who had stayed vigilant, and friends who had refused to forget Jennifer all became part of the narrative of recovery. Their collective efforts had, in small ways, shaped the eventual outcome. In town gatherings and quiet conversations, people spoke not only of the fear and anxiety, but also of perseverance, hope, and enduring bonds that had carried them through years of uncertainty. Even as the legal process moved forward against Kane, the case of Jennifer Harper left an indelible mark on those involved. Lessons of vigilance, community solidarity, and the importance of never abandoning a search for truth became embedded in Cedar Grove's consciousness. Detective Benson, Mark, Eleanor, and Jennifer herself carried the story forward, sharing it with others to emphasize the value of persistence, attention to detail, and courage in the face of fear. In the end, Cedar Grove learned that resolution did not erase the past, but provided a foundation for moving forward. Jennifer Harper's survival, her return to family, and the apprehension of the person responsible brought closure, however imperfect, and allowed the town to gradually shed the long shadow of uncertainty. Peace, tentative yet tangible, began to settle over Cedar Grove, and for the first time in 6 years, the town could imagine a future not defined by fear, but by resilience. Cliffhanger/reflective close. The case was solved, but its legacy endured, reminding everyone in Cedar Grove that safety was fragile, hope was vital, and vigilance was not optional. Jennifer's story, though scarred by trauma, became a testament to survival, courage, and the unyielding pursuit of justice.